for talks today. Hello, I'm John Roberts in Washington. Good Thursday afternoon to you. Hi, Sandra.
Good to be with you, John. I'm Sandra Smith in New York. Ukrainian and Russian officials meeting with little common ground between them. And as Vladimir Putin continues an unrelenting assault on Kyiv. Plumes of smoke followed by thunderous explosions from a brewery in eastern Ukraine taking direct fire from Russians.
Don't forget, some breweries in Ukraine were making Molotov cocktails instead of beer. This is Ukraine's capital region again comes under attack. Cell phone video coming in now from Borodyanka, a town about 40 miles west of Kyiv. The harrowing footage shows debris scattered all over streets and buildings, either heavily damaged or, in some cases, reduced to outright rubble.
And in the south, Russian troops freely roaming the streets of Kherson after taking control of that port city. It is the biggest Ukrainian city to fall into the hands of the Russians so far and provides Vladimir Putin with a strategic victory. Now, Russia is eyeing Odessa, Ukraine's biggest port city, in a move that could leave the country landlocked and unable to receive crucial supplies from the West.
We are covering this from all the angles with reports on the ground from Washington, D.C. to Kyiv. But we begin with Benjamin Hall. He is live from the Ukrainian capital with the very latest. Benji?
Yeah, hi, John. And we've seen a significant increase in the number of attacks aimed at urban centres, at residential centres today by the Russian forces. And there's a real concern now that as tough as the Ukrainians have been so far, the Russians really are managing to push ahead. Our correspondent and our colleague here, Trey Yingst, spoke with President Zelensky earlier. He was at a press conference he gave. Have a listen to this back and forth.
You spoke this week with President Biden. How would you describe your conversations with the U.S. leader? And do you believe the Americans waited too long to give Ukraine the support you need to push back this Russian offensive?
We have good contact. I can tell you the truth. And it's a pity that it began after the beginning of this war, but we have it. And my appreciation to him and to his team.
So, look, no doubt there that he wished he had been receiving these weapons and more support before the real invasion began. He didn't get it. And as a result, now, to some degree, they are playing catch-up. But certainly what we're seeing here on the ground is that escalation that I'm talking about. Here in Kyiv at night, there tends to be some artillery shelling. And the concern is that Russian troops are trying to surround the city here. And there have been a number of bombings just earlier in the day. This building that you see here, which caught fire, resulting in significant damage. Russian troops have also taken control of their first city, the city of Kherson. It's down in the south of the country near Crimea. It is strategically significant and home to about 280,000 people. And what they've done in this city is make it very clear that the Russians, that if people don't rise up and try and fight them, then they will be able to continue living in so-called freedom under the Ukrainian flag. But they also made it clear, and they sent a message through the mayor, that if they do try to fight back, their cities will be razed, and that is razed to the ground. And that is sort of the message that is going out to other cities as well. Russian troops are now moving into the country from multiple sides, and they control territory in the north, the south, and the east. In fact, they are extending those areas of control further every day. The fact is that although they will be held back initially, the sheer scale of this invasion means that they will continue to take land. To try and stop them, the Ukrainian army is blowing up bridges. This one near Kyiv was taken out yesterday. But what it also means is that if Putin can't get his forces in, he reverts back to his age-old tactic of bombing civilians. And that's exactly what we're seeing him do here. And, of course, the refugee crisis continues to get worse as all this happens. 1.1 million people, the UN says, have now fled the country. That's in 8 days alone. Also only set to get worse.
Benjamin, it was quite remarkable for the world to see Vladimir Zelensky there as he was speaking. You have to assume he is absolutely exhausted, but still showing such resilience and strength for his people.
Yeah, absolutely. Remarkable for him to hold a press conference while he's at the moment hiding from the Russians. Yeah. They say that there are Russian special forces hunting him. And here he was calling journalists to the presidential palace and hosting a press conference for about 50 minutes and taking questions. You know, he's a brave man. He has galvanized support of the Ukrainians in the face of this overwhelming opposition. Let's just see how long he can continue to do that. But he desperately said, we need support. We would like planes. We want the no-fly zone. And you got a sense, a tone from the tone in his voice, that he does need more, and that we're at a critical time right now in this war.
Benjamin, we have been covering the plight of people who have been trying to escape Ukraine across the border to Poland or Romania and Slovakia or Moldova. You, on the other hand, were traveling the other direction. You were in Lviv. Now you're in there at Kiev. What was the journey like for you across Ukraine as you were under attack?
Well, it should only be about 5 hours if, before the war started. It took us about 20, just over 20 hours. And I can tell you what was fascinating was just seeing how all the different towns and villages along the way have really set up and prepared themselves for this invasion. Every single village, every single small town even has tank traps around it now, has its defences up, and it has local militia who are all there preparing. No one's going out in those villages. Everyone's staying at home. They go out to the pharmacy, they go out to get food, but that's about it. And that was 20 hours, 20 plus hours of driving. And every step of the way, you get the sense that there's an invasion coming, even to the areas where the Russian troops aren't yet. It is a bleak, bleak moment in this country, and you get that feeling. And then, of course, we managed to make it into Kyiv through the one remaining entry that hasn't been surrounded by Russian forces. We'll see what tonight brings. Sandra?
Benjamin, you're a brave man. Stay safe. Thank you. Sandra?
Benjamin in Kyiv for us. Thank you. Now to the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, where our own Mike Tobin is on the ground there. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Sandra. Second round of ceasefire negotiations has concluded. The Russian and Ukrainian delegations met in a town across the Belarus border called Biloveska Pusha. It's about 400 miles northwest of the capital city of Kyiv. Most of the information comes from MacCallum. Podolyak. He's a member of that delegation. He says the Ukrainian needs were not met, therefore no ceasefire. He did say that some agreement was struck regarding humanitarian corridors, but going into this stage of the negotiations, the Ukrainians called that the minor program. So no ceasefire to this point, and the Russians say what they want in terms of ceasefire negotiation is complete disarmament of Ukraine. So absent a ceasefire, the Russian invasion continues, and that means the refugees continue to flee west. The train cars get packed, particularly when leaving cities like Kyiv. A lot of them arrive here in Kiev. And some of them stay, some of them head for the border. The UNHCR now says that it's 1,040,000, the number of people who have crossed as of last tally. 52% of them are heading into Poland. Others head for countries like Slovakia, Hungary, Moldova. A small amount have crossed in the other direction into Russia. On the Polish side of the border, they do have structures like temporary housing, even a medical train for the injured or sick after they cross over. Guys, back to you.
You know, Mike, I was struck by that image there of the officials from both sides getting together for the peace talks. There were a lot of handshakes that were going around there. I mean, indicating that there was a certain sense of respect for either side as they sat down to try to hammer out some sort of agreement for at least a temporary ceasefire. But as that's going on, you've got a guy in Moscow who's saying, crush the country.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And if you look at the titles of the different people who are involved in the ceasefire talks, particularly from the Russian side, you have a lot of deputies, a lot of underlings. You don't have Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in that negotiation. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of optimism going into these. And you even heard from the Ukrainian side, not a lot of optimism going into it. You see what they want. The Ukrainians want a complete ceasefire. The Russians want a complete demilitarization. You could really translate that to unconditional surrender.
Mike, before we get to our other reporters, your expectations there on the ground as you head well into the evening hours. Obviously, you've been through a few of these nights so far. What do you expect tonight?
Well, I think all eyes are on Kiev right now. You still have this ominous convoy that is parked on the edges of the city there, and we're all wondering when it will do something, if it will do something. And usually with nightfall, you get a lot of pounding in Kiev. You get it in Kharkiv. And now you have the offensives beginning, and after they've taken Kherson, apparently taken Kherson, you see some of those offensives spreading out to some of the other coastal towns.
Mike Tobin on the ground in Lviv for us. We'll check back in with you shortly.
Yeah.
Thank you. John.
All right, Senator, let's bring in Alaska Republican Senator Dan Sullivan, member of the Armed Services and Veterans Affairs Committee. Senator, it's good to have you. Thanks for coming into the studio.
Good to be on the show, John.
It's good to somewhat be back to normal here in terms of COVID restrictions. At any rate, you and 15 of your Senate colleagues wrote a letter to President Biden in which you really ripped him about his energy policies. You said, quote, your administration's energy policies, which focus on restricting, delaying, and killing the production of American energy, have had the predictable but catastrophic effect of driving up energy prices for American working families, increasing pink slips for American energy workers, and significantly empowering our adversaries, especially Putin, who has used energy as a weapon for decades. What is it mainly that you are seeking the president does here?
Well, first, I just want to do heartfelt condolences to the Ukrainian people right now. You know, we're seeing carnage, but we're seeing a lot of courage. And you and I were just talking about that on the set. It's quite remarkable. You know, in that letter to the president, it was before his State of the Union. And we said, look, there's some things that you need to do, Mr. President, now that we are clearly in this new era of authoritarian aggression led by Putin, led by Xi Jinping in China, and one of the most important is with regard to energy. We put forward 12 things that he could take actions on right now, but the basic point of the letter was saying we need to produce more American energy, and right now, in terms of sanctions, we need to make sure that we're not buying any more Russian energy. Right now, believe it or not, we're buying almost 700,000 barrels a day of Russian oil in America, literally subsidizing this war. And this administration is trying to shut down American energy in states like mine, the great state of Alaska. So this is a policy that makes no sense. And interestingly, you mentioned it was about 22 senators. We wrote that letter. But now there's some Democrats calling for many of the same things in terms of reorienting a course correction on the Biden administration's energy policies, particularly in light of the war in Ukraine. You
know, my colleague Sandra Smith was telling me this morning that in the last few days, apparently we have not bought any Russian oil. And this is an official government policy. This is private importers saying, either doing it out of principle, right, or saying we don't want to get stuck with a ship full of oil from Russia that suddenly gets seized because of sanctions. So apparently, while it's not official policy, we are reducing our imports of Russian oil. I want to ask you this question, though. With all these sanctions that we have against Russia, and the Secretary of State yesterday said that because of the devaluation of the ruble, inflation, Biden's $600 billion war chest is basically vanished. Yet he continues this push in Ukraine. You're a former military man. What will stop him?
Well, look, I think we need to continue the sanctions policy. And so far, it's worked. But going back to energy, his key strength, which is also his key weakness, is energy. And right now, we are not sanctioning the Russian energy sector, either natural gas or oil. And as you know, John, that's where he funds his war machine. Last year, the United States sent about $17 billion to Putin through the purchase of Russian oil that helps him with regard to energy. So to me,
then there's all these European nations as well who are absolutely reliant on Russian energy.
Absolutely, but you've seen some courage, right? You've seen the new chancellor of Germany say we're not going to do the Nord Stream 2 gas line. That took a lot of courage. You see the Canadian Prime Minister, they import not much at all, but they said we're not going to import Russian oil. My point has been, if you have Ukrainian grandmothers standing up to Russian tanks, I think President Biden can stand up to his far left party, part of his party that's very anti-American energy, and say, this doesn't make sense. We need to produce more American energy, and we shouldn't be importing any Russian oil right now. And I think you're going to start to see that happening.
So as Putin continues his relentless push now, apparently down in the south, Russian forces have taken over Kherson. There's an idea that they're going to push west into Odessa to try to capture that Black Sea port as well. And, of course, continue the push from the northwest down into Ukraine, past Kharkiv and through Kiev, and maybe out to the west of the country. You were a Marine. You were a reservist. You did 3 tours of, you were called to active duty 3 times, including a tour of duty in Afghanistan. Where do you see this going ultimately?
Well, look, it's grim. And you mentioned the armor that they're moving into these urban centers. When you have armor battles in urban centers, it's carnage. These Ukrainians are incredibly brave, but right now the situation is grim. What we can be doing beyond the sanctions is getting as many lethal weapons to the Ukrainians as possible. Stinger missiles, Javelin missile systems, anti-air artillery. That we need to continue. We got a slow start.
On that point,
yeah.
Why wasn't that all put into the country ahead of this?
Well, look, there was a lot. The administration had a very slow start with regard to getting lethal weapons to the Ukrainians, and they delayed it for a number of months. I'm not exactly sure what they were doing on that with regard to the delays. Certainly hasn't helped, but we need to continue to funnel that in there. We need to help them with intelligence, and then we're going to need to help with regard to this insurgency.
Yeah, real quick question, because the president's asking Congress for $10 billion, but there's been bipartisan negotiations on an aid package. What's taking so long?
You know, initially their supplemental, they actually did not include military dollars, and they were trying to take that out of the top line. We rejected that. I think they saw that was a ridiculous move. We need to move forward, not just on aid to the Ukrainians, but as I mentioned in that letter, our own budget, our own national security budget. You know, the president put forward a Department of Defense budget last year with significant cuts to our military. One of the things we said in the letter is, Mr. President, you can't do that again. That will only encourage Putin, Xi Jinping, when they see the President of the United States putting forward a budget to cut his own armed services, the dictators of the world smile. We need a strong military budget that includes aid to Ukraine, but to make our own military much more lethal, we hope the president puts forward something robust. He didn't do it last year. He needs to do it this year.
Ronald Reagan said it, peace through strength. Senator Sullivan, good to see you.
Good to see you, John. Thanks.
Senator?
John, we've got some breaking news now and some brand new video coming out of Ukraine. Brian Yanis is joining us. He's got the new details on this and possible oil plant explosion in Kharkiv. What are we hearing?
Yeah, Sandra, we are now hearing that there is shelling that's happening in Kharkiv, and we have an oil plant explosion in Kharkiv. There's also rescue operations underway right now in Kharkiv. This is about 88 miles northeast of the capital city of Kyiv. We know that at least 22 people have been killed in shelling there, innocent civilians in that city of Kharkiv. In Kharkiv, there is a video that we're now getting also of shelling in that city, the second largest city there in Kharkiv. That is the second largest city in Ukraine. We've noticed, obviously, that this is why the president has wanted to put, President Zelensky has wanted a no-fly zone over Ukraine because of this continued, and here is the oil plant that I was talking about in Chernihiv, Ukraine. This is latest video that's coming out. All we know is that this video is brand new. This is the second time that I've seen at least one oil plant in Ukraine. You'll recall the other one in Kyiv that exploded a couple days ago. You can see the emergency workers that are trying to put out that fire amid continued shelling that is not only happening there from the Russians, but also in the second largest city of Kharkiv. And I will repeat again that in Chernihiv, we are dealing with at least the Ukrainian officials say 22 civilians who have died there from shelling in apartment buildings as well. So on top of emergency rescue operations that are now happening in civilian areas, we now have that situation. And in Kharkiv, you can see this is the result of more shelling from the Russians into civilian areas. You can see holes in apartment buildings there. This video from Kharkiv. Again, the Ukrainians have said more than 2,000 people have died there of civilians. And President Putin of Russia says that the Ukrainians are using human beings as shields. Of course, that's a lie. And we are now seeing the result of that shelling by the Russians in the city of Kharkiv as emergency workers there are battling fires in Kharkiv and Chernihiv as the offensive by the Russians continues here. Sandra.
Yeah, a lot of breaking news coming in right now. And by the way, we're told Jen Psaki's about to begin the briefing there. We'll get to her when she takes questions from the reporters at the White House. Real quickly, though, Brian, also some breaking news coming into us is that Ukraine and Russia officials have apparently just met and agreed to create these safe corridors, we are told, for civilians to evacuate and for humanitarian supplies to be delivered in. This is a member of Ukraine's delegation in these talks with Russia, says that the two parties have reached a tentative agreement to organize safe corridors for civilians to evacuate and bring those supplies in. That just hitting the wires right now as we continue to look at this new video that you just brought to us us, Brian, as we await the White House. A quick final thought before we get there.
A significant development. Not only do you have hundreds of thousands of people making their way out of Ukraine, you also have the fact that you have over 1 million people in the country of Ukraine that are now displaced. If this is true, if the Ukrainians can actually believe what's coming from the Russians, that is a significant development. How that happens, we'll see.
Yeah, it was one of the advisors to Zelensky who took part in those talks in Belarus near the Polish border. So we will get an update on that shortly. John?
All right, Sandra, thank you. The first big shipment of international medical aid for Ukraine is set to arrive today in Poland, including 6 tons of trauma care and surgery supplies. Meanwhile, the United Nations now estimates that more than 1 million refugees have fled Ukraine since the war began. Connell McShane is live near the Polish border with Ukraine with the very latest from there. How are things in Przemysl?
Well, you know, it's interesting, John, because you look at that 1 million number. UNICEF actually said about 500,000 are children, and that's what we see here, where we are at this refugee camp where people are gathered. These buses just came in from the border, or these people just came in on buses from the border a little while ago. Your people screaming out instructions here. It's basically, hey, where do you want to go next? And now we have a bus that is leaving here. Some of the buses that leave here actually end up going back into Ukraine. I believe from the announcement that was just made, this is one of them. So you see people going back to rejoin their families. Some are going back to rejoin the fight. We've learned from being here the last few days that every single family and person, including the one you're looking at live right now, has a story. And when we hear some of these stories, we're surprised by some of the individual twists. Let me show you some video we shot a short time ago inside the building behind me. We met a family from Kharkiv. I heard you guys talking about Kharkiv a moment ago. And the long and short of it is you have a mother with her 2 daughters. Her older daughter is 21, speaks great English. So the mom saw our camera and told the daughter to come up to us. She wanted her to tell us about her husband still back in Kharkiv. Take a listen.
He really wants to fight on Ukrainian side because it's crazy what is going on, and he really on our side. But people just can see this red passport and just kill him.
Now the explanation of that is that her husband has a Russian passport. He's been living in Ukraine for a number of years since he got married, and as she was saying there, he loves Ukraine. But she wants everybody to know that. She wants to know that he loves Ukraine because in case there's some sort of a misunderstanding back in Kharkiv, whereas things have been very, very tough for a long, long time. It's just one of many examples of these individual stories behind the numbers. 1 million refugees and counting. Over half of them are children, and about half of the total coming here to Poland before moving on, in many cases, to other locations. John, Sandra.
So many people dealing with so much hardship. Connell McShane for us in Przemysl. Connell, thank you. Sandra?
Live to the White House now, where Jen Psaki is taking a question on the possibility of banning Russian oil and energy imports. Let's listen.
And the president, the volatility in the oil markets, as the president has been predicting, and as you referenced, he talked about in the speech he gave last week, is a direct result of the fact that President Putin invaded Ukraine, and that has created volatility. One of the big reason, of course, that the president announced the release of 30 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and the coordinated release is to address that and ensure we are doing what we can to put more in the marketplace. But again, his prism he looks at this through is how can we maximize impact on President Putin while minimizing it on the American people.
And President Zelensky has called on Russia to be stripped of its ability to vote in the UN Security Council. Does the U.S. want Russia to be removed as a permanent member?
We don't see that happening. We certainly understand they have a permanent seat on the Security Council. Of course, that is why it's so particularly disturbing that Russia, given its particular responsibility for upholding the UN Charter, is actively subverting the Charter and abusing its position. The fact is they have a permanent, we're really focused on isolating them, on isolating Russia and holding them accountable. And as you know, that's what we and our allies are focused on doing. Go ahead.
President Zelensky is calling again for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Is that something you're giving any thought to at all?
Again, the reason why that has not been a step the president has been willing to take, or we have been interested in taking, is because a no-fly zone requires implementation. It would require essentially the U.S. military shooting down Russian planes and prompting a potential direct war with Russia, the exact step that we want to avoid.
When the president of Finland visits tomorrow, does the president want to talk to him about joining NATO?
Well, the president is looking forward to welcoming the president of Finland tomorrow to the White House to continue their conversations about enhancing our strong bilateral relations. I would note that they have spoken twice in the last few months, once on December 13th and again on January 18th. I would expect they will discuss the U.S.-Finnish defense relationship, which is very strong and in fact complements Finland's close partnership with NATO. Along with Sweden, Finland's status is as an enhanced opportunity partner for the alliance, which helps ensure strong defense and close security ties in the Baltic Sea region. But it remains for any country, up to that country and up to members of NATO to determine any path forward there.
And lastly, Russia's been cracking down on independent media and dissent at home. What's your reaction to that?
We have seen that and are deeply concerned. Let me give you some specific examples, because as journalists yourself, I think you will hear it as quite jarring. One moment, sorry, I just want to find all the specifics in here. Thank you for your patience. 1 second. Okay. The Kremlin right now is engaged in a full assault on media freedom and the truth. Let me give you some examples. Today, independent media sites such as Echo Moscow Radio and TV Rain are off the air and threaten to block, they kicked them off the air, and they threaten to block online platforms such as VOA Russia. We've seen Russia prohibit Russian media from referring to what they are doing in Ukraine as, quote, a war, or, quote, an invasion, or, quote, an attack. They are banning their use of terms even, allowing media to use only government-sourced information to report on the war. They've called a special session of the parliament to consider a bill to make unofficial reporting on Russia's further invasion punishable by up to 15 years in prison. They've arrested more than 7,300 protesters, some immediately after they began to protest Putin's war of choice. They have blocked and shut down social media sites such as Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and they've limited the amount of dollars citizens can take out of the country. What they are trying to do is block any information about what they are doing to invade a sovereign country, and they're taking severe steps to do exactly that. Go ahead.
Just follow up. Is the administration moving closer to banning Russian oil imports?
I don't have any assessment of that for you. I just wanted to note the difference between them, or that there are several different components of options.
I guess the question is, what's the calculus in waiting if it's ultimately the step that the United States is going to take?
Well, there's a policy process that is undergone for any decision that is made. Sometimes those move rapidly, and often there are a range of factors that are discussed as those decisions are made.
The Pentagon noted today that Russian convoy that's about 40 miles at least long is still stalled, largely, they believe.
Yeah.
Does the president still think, though, that ultimately Russia is successfully going to take Kyiv?
That continues to be their aspiration. I think the Pentagon also noted that they now have 90% of their military combat power pre-staged at the Ukrainian border is now in Ukraine. They've launched more than 480 missiles at Ukraine in the invasion. That's about up from 450 since Thursday. So they are continuing to take aggressive steps and move towards their ultimate objective, which is taking over Kyiv and taking over the country.
Any assessment on timing for that?
I don't have an assessment to offer from here. Go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
Is there any situation where President Biden would sit down with President Putin in person again, so long as Russian forces are in Ukraine?
I can't make an assessment of that, Caitlin. Right now, they're invading a sovereign country and continuing to escalate every day. We're never going to take diplomacy ever off the table, but again, now's not the moment for that.
But why not rule out an in-person meeting if his forces are in Ukraine, a sovereign country?
Again, we have discussions internally about what the best steps are to de-escalate what is clearly a horrific conflict on the ground. Now is not the moment. We're not planning a meeting between them or an engagement or a call. The president's been very, very clear about that. But we'll have those discussions internally and weigh the range of factors. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. We understand that new U.S. sanctions against oligarchs are going to be announced this afternoon.
Yeah.
Individual oligarchs might be named.
Yes.
How is the White House choosing which oligarchs to sanction? Do you start with the richest ones or the ones with the closest ties to Vladimir Putin?
We look at one of the big factors is, of course, the proximity to President Putin. We want him to feel the squeeze. We want the people around him to feel the squeeze. I don't believe this is going to be the last set of oligarchs. Making them a priority and a focus of our individual sanctions is something the president has been focused on.
And I understand that a travel ban is going to be one component of this announcement. What about oligarchs who are already here? Will they have to leave the country immediately?
Let me check on that for you. I think we'll have some sort of backgrounder on this to get you more details, and the president will have more specifics himself in about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on how close we are in time.
Okay. The president announced the other night a ban on Russian aircraft traveling over U.S. airspace. As far as you know, have there been any incursions on U.S. airspace by the Russians since then? And what would the U.S. do if a Russian aircraft were to violate that airspace?
I'm not aware of any incursions. I'm certainly happy to check on that, and I can check. I'd really point you to the FAA on that, but and I'll see if there's more we can offer.
Okay. And then finally, we all saw the news about the January 6th committee and their belief that there was criminal activity. I wanted to get your reaction to that. And also, does the president believe that former Vice President Pence should volunteer to testify before the committee?
Well, let me first reiterate something you heard the president say. The former president subverted the Constitution in an attempt to overturn a lawful and fair election. His actions represent a unique and existential threat to our democracy. And the president has been clear that these events warrant a full investigation. Part of this is what we're seeing play out and what you just mentioned and has been reported over the course of the morning. We, of course, respect the independence of the Department of Justice. That gives confidence to the American people. That's how it should always be. And they will make a decision about how to move from here. As it relates to Vice President Pence, I would say the president believes that anyone who is asked should participate in the process of getting to the bottom of what happened on January 6th. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. On gas, you just said that less supply raises prices. It's not in our strategic interest to reduce the supply. Yeah. We also know the president as recently as yesterday talked about increasing domestic manufacturing to bring down prices on inflated items like goods. So why not apply the same logic to energy and increase domestic production here?
Well, there are 9,000 approved oil leases that the oil companies are not tapping into currently, so I would ask them that question.
Is there nothing that the administration can do to get those providers back to pre-pandemic levels?
Do you think the oil companies don't have enough money to drill on the places that have been pre-approved?
Just asking.
I would point that question to them, and we can talk about it more tomorrow when you learn more.
Do you think that opening the Keystone pipeline and having more energy-friendly policies might do that?
The Keystone Pipeline has never been operational. It would take years for that to have any impact. I know a number of members of Congress have suggested that, but that is a proposed solution that has no relationship or would have no impact on what the problem is. We here all agree is an issue.
So during those years where it would take to bring down prices, as you're saying, we should just continue to buy Russian oil?
Well, again, Jackie, I think you're familiar with a number of steps we've taken, a historic release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Let me finish. What we can do over time, and what this is all a reminder of in the president's view, is our need to reduce our reliance on oil. The Europeans need to do that. We need to do that. If we do more to invest in clean energy, more to invest in other sources of energy, that's exactly what we can do to prevent this from happening in the future. We welcome any Republicans from joining us in that effort. Go ahead.
As long as we're buying Russian oil, though, aren't we financing the war?
Well, Jackie, again, it's only about 10% of what we're importing. I've not made any announcement about any decision on that front, but our objective here and our focus is making sure that any step we take maximizes the impact on President Putin and minimizes it on the American people. And anyone who's calling for an end to the carve-out should be clear that would raise prices. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. On the oligarch sanctions, I know they haven't even been announced
Really interesting exchanges there at the White House with our own Jackie Heinrich talking to Jen Psaki. Jen Psaki making it very clear where the White House stands on banning imports of Russian oil and energy into this country, saying there's no strategic interest in doing so. I'll remind you that just a short time ago today, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi put her full endorsement behind a Russian oil ban, saying, quote, "I'm all for that. Ban it." So interesting to watch where this is going. And to Jen Psaki's point, back to Jackie's question, when Jen Psaki and many Democrats in this White House like to say there's 9,000 untapped oil leases on federal lands in this country right now that are not being used, ask them why they're not. I have. And the answer is the uncertainty under this administration, and they don't want to take on that responsibility, not knowing if the rules of the game will change midway, knowing that this administration has launched an all-out war on fossil fuels. We're going to have more on that coming up in a short time from now. John?
All right, Sandra, great information there. U.S. defense officials, meantime, warning that as Russia becomes more aggressive in its targeting, it will become less precise and less discriminate, which could result in even more civilian deaths. This as explosions continue across Ukraine. Our national security correspondent, Jennifer Griffin, live at the Pentagon now with the latest on the military moves. Jennifer?
In additional aid from Capitol Hill for Ukraine. A senior U.S. defense official tells us, as you've been reporting, that 90% of Russia's invading forces are now inside Ukraine. We're told there's no indication the Russians have tapped into reinforcements. That 40-mile convoy that we've talked so much about is still largely stalled across the north. Russians have been trying to make progress on Kyiv, but according to a senior defense official, they've been flummoxed and frustrated. It remains about 15 miles north of the city. It has been 2 to 3 days since they have made any progress. That convoy hasn't moved in 2 to 3 days. Attacks from the Ukrainians, we're told, have slowed down the convoy. Mud and flat tires, also showing poor maintenance, have been an issue. Regarding Russia's Air Force, which has been ineffective so far, Ukraine had carefully marshaled, we're told, and employed its air defense systems. The airspace remains contested. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin spoke to this last night.
If you establish a no-fly zone, certainly in order to enforce that no-fly zone, you'll have to engage Russian aircraft. And again, that would put us at war with Russia.
Most of the 480 missiles that have been fired from into Ukraine have come from within Ukraine, we're told, meaning Russia is launching these missiles from mobile launchers. About 230 have been fired from inside Ukraine in the last week, 160 from Russian territory itself, 70 from Belarus, and the rest coming from the Black Sea. There are reports Russians are planning for mass executions in town squares after they take the cities, but a senior U.S. defense official was unable to elaborate on these reports. John?
Jennifer, one area of the country, as we come out to the touchscreen here, where the Russian forces appear to have been fairly effective in gobbling up territory, is in the south. We pointed out that there was kind of a two-pronged invasion here from Crimea, where regular forces are staged and didn't have to be brought in. One up to the northwest here, Russian forces and Ukrainian officials confirm that Russian forces have taken Kherson. This is what Benjamin Hall was